Hi, I'm Malis. She lay on the floor, coffee soaking through her uniform, her wallet scattered like trash. No one moved. I did. And for that, my mother leaned in and hissed, "Don't start your pity drama again." But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 10 minutes later, a Black Hawk landed outside. Why? You'll want to see for yourself. Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening from? And have you ever helped someone, only to be mocked for it? Share it in the comments. I read every one. It was one of those overcast spring mornings where the wind blew sharp enough to remind you that winter wasn't done talking. The cafe smelled of toasted bagels and overcooked ambition, young professionals hunched over laptops, sipping oat milk lattes like it was their lifeline. I sat across from my mother near the window, pretending to stir my coffee when really I was just trying to steady my nerves. "So, your sister-made partner," Mom said casually, like she hadn't been waiting all morning to drop it. "At 37. Can you believe it?" I smiled without showing teeth. "Good for her." She leaned in a bit. "And she's talking about freezing her eggs. Smart, right? Planning ahead." Her voice was light, but I heard what she wasn't saying. "What have you planned, Malis? Any direction? Any milestones?" "I'm happy where I am," I said, eyes drifting toward the glass door where a gust of wind pushed a napkin across the parking lot. Mom clicked her tongue and sipped her drink like it tasted of disappointment. A sudden shout sliced through the low murmur of the cafe. I turned just in time to see a woman shoved, by a man who barely glanced back. She was in her 30s, slim, wearing an army green jacket and pushing a tray with 2 coffees. One of the cups tumbled, slamming into her chest and splattering down her arms. The other splashed her legs before crashing to the floor. She hit the tile hard, and the sound made everyone stop for a second. Then they just resumed. Conversations picked up again. Laughter returned. Not a single person moved. Her wallet had flown open beside her, a worn military ID peeking out, and just above her sock, a scar twisted down her shin. I caught my breath. Her hand trembled as she tried to sit up, her breathing shallow. I stood. "Sit down," Mom hissed, barely above a whisper. "This isn't your moment, Malis." I ignored her and rushed over. "Are you okay?" The woman flinched when I touched her arm. She smelled of spilled cream and something metallic. Blood. Her fingers tried to gather her ID, then stopped. Her eyes were wide, but her voice came out faint. "Just my shoulder." I crouched beside her. "Don't move too fast. Let's check if it's dislocated." "God, Malis," Mom's voice cut through from our table. "She probably staged that. People do it for attention. You don't need to get involved." I didn't answer her. Others were muttering too. Someone said, "They do this all the time. Want a scene, then sue?" I looked around. Indifference. Disgust. One man smirked as he sipped his drink. "That's not how this works," I muttered. The woman, her name tag read Aliyah, was trying to sit up fully, face flushed from pain or embarrassment or both. I helped her wipe the coffee from her jacket sleeve, revealing yellowing bruises under the fabric. When she caught me staring, she whispered, "Bad days come in clusters, don't they?" Her voice had a weight to it, like someone used to swallowing pain whole. I nodded. "Some days just want to burn." I helped her into a chair at the corner booth. She didn't look like she wanted to cry, just disappear. Across the cafe, I heard a man mutter under his breath, "They always play victim." I turned but didn't see who said it, just the back of a head and the shake of a newspaper. Aliyah winced as she shifted in the seat. "I'm fine," she said again, softer this time. "No, you're not," I said, "but you will be." 10 minutes passed, maybe less. The mood in the cafe had already returned to its usual drone. Someone laughed at a podcast. A blender screamed in the back. Then the wind changed, literally. A low rumble rolled through the windows, followed by a shadow darkening the parking lot. And then, rotors, loud, steady, undeniable. A Black Hawk descended like something from a dream or a nightmare. The landing shook the glasses on every table. Plates rattled. People stood, unsure if they should run or watch. Doors flew open. 3 soldiers in uniform entered briskly. They didn't speak. Didn't need to. They moved past the register, past the frozen barista, straight to Aliyah. One knelt beside her, gently touching her wrist. "Ma'am, we've got you." She didn't flinch this time. The cafe was silent. Everyone watched, eyes darting between Aliyah and the soldiers like it couldn't compute. Then one turned to me, a woman with sharp eyes and kindness buried under protocol. She looked straight at me. "Thank you for not walking away." Behind me, I heard my mother's cup clatter in her saucer. No one said a word. Her silence was louder than any apology, and it pressed against me like a weight I couldn't name. I stood still, watching as the soldiers formed a half circle around Aliyah. Their movements were quiet, practiced, every gesture calibrated with respect. One of them, the one who had spoken to me, stepped forward. His eyes scanned the cafe briefly before settling on mine again. "I'm Command Sergeant Major Rhodes," he said, voice low and firm. "You helped one of ours today." I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Not yet. I was still trying to process how a woman who had just been tripped in a cafe could summon an entire military presence without saying a word. Rhodes knelt beside Aliyah, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. "It's all right now," he murmured to her. "You're not alone." Then he turned back toward me and added, "She served in one of the most dangerous covert recovery units this country's ever deployed, decorated more times than we're allowed to print." I must have blinked, because he tilted his head, as if softening the blow. It's not common knowledge. Her last mission was buried under 3 layers of red tape, but we monitor our own, especially when one goes silent. Behind me, my mother's breath caught. She didn't speak, but I could feel the heat of her discomfort crawling across the table we'd abandoned. Around us, the other patrons who had ignored Aliyah just minutes ago now stared with wide, stunned eyes. A few raised their phones, pretending to check texts, but clearly recording. The barista who had been smirking had disappeared behind the espresso machine, probably wishing she could melt into the back wall. Rhodes ignored the crowd. Her distress beacon was activated through her service ID. Took us about 6 minutes to trace and mobilize. She's not supposed to be alone in public without a monitor, not since the last incident. I looked at Aliyah, who still hadn't said much. Her jaw was clenched, her eyes dry. She wasn't embarrassed. She was calculating, scanning the room like she was reading the truth in every face. She slowly moved to reach her bag. As she did, her jacket sleeve rose, revealing a tattoo on the inside of her forearm, a black falcon with sharp wings spread in mid-dive. Beneath it, a string of numbers. I didn't understand it, but something about it stopped me cold. Rhodes noticed my stare. He followed my gaze, then looked back at me with a strange mixture of caution and recognition. "Only 6 people in the country have that mark," he said, voice dropping to a near whisper. "It's not just ink, it's clearance and consequences." I didn't reply. I just nodded slowly. He added, "You helped the wrong woman for the right reasons. That matters more than you think." I felt something inside me shift, not because I suddenly felt noble, but because for once, someone had acknowledged that doing something was better than looking away. I hadn't calculated it, hadn't tried to be heroic. I just moved. That was all. That's when my mother finally spoke. "My daughter," she said, trying to laugh. "She didn't know anything. She just acted out of instinct. We all were caught off guard, weren't we? I mean, this could have happened to anyone." Rhodes stood tall, his expression unreadable. "But it didn't happen to just anyone. Everyone else watched. Your daughter moved." Mom flushed, then straightened her blazer as if trying to rebuild her armor. "Well, you know how sensitive things are nowadays. Everyone's walking on eggshells." "Sometimes the problem isn't the eggshells," he cut in, his voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "It's who insists we keep stepping over them." My mother went quiet. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her shoulders dropped, just slightly, as if someone had tugged at the strings holding her upright. I glanced at her, and for the first time in a long while, she looked small, like she didn't belong to the room she'd always assumed she ruled. And in that pause, between her shrinking and my standing, I noticed something else. The way Rhodes looked at her wasn't scolding. It was dismissive, like she wasn't the point. Like I was. I wasn't trying to make a statement, I said quietly. I know, he replied. That's why it means more. Behind him, 2 other soldiers flanked Aaliyah, now gently helping her to her feet. Her movements were slow, but steady. She nodded once, acknowledging me. No smile, no extra words, just that single nod, and in it, more gratitude than I knew how to receive. The hum of the helicopter outside was fading now, like the morning itself had decided to exhale. I glanced around the cafe once more, everyone still frozen in their own shame or curiosity. Then Rhodes turned to me one last time, his tone gentled. You're braver than you know, he said, meeting my eyes. But you already knew that, didn't you? I didn't. Not until that moment. But the next day I'd be tested again. This time, at home. The sun had long disappeared behind low-hanging clouds by the time I pulled into the driveway. From the outside, our house looked the same. White siding, trimmed bushes, porch light flickering from a loose bulb. But walking inside that night felt different, heavier, as if something invisible had taken up space in every corner. Dinner was already on the table. Meatloaf, peas, mashed potatoes. My mom's default when she didn't want to put in effort, but didn't want anyone to complain either. I slipped into my usual chair across from Drew, my older brother, who barely glanced up from his plate. My father sat at the head of the table, eyes focused on a newspaper he hadn't turned in 10 minutes. No one said a word at first. The only sound was the dull clink of silverware on porcelain. Then Drew smirked and tilted his head at me. So, we're helping the troops now? Patricia, sitting at the end of the table with a napkin in her lap like royalty at a pageant, didn't even lift her gaze. She muttered into her food, "That stunt embarrassed us." I stopped mid-bite. "Embarrassed you?" She set her fork down with exaggerated care. "You don't know who's watching, Malis. You never do. That kind of spectacle, it reflects on all of us. The neighborhood's already talking." The neighborhood, I said, my voice colder than I intended, was filming. Drew let out a quiet laugh and sipped his water like it was wine. "Seriously, you didn't think that was a bit dramatic?" And there it was. That word again. Always their favorite. I didn't respond. I didn't trust my voice. Instead, I stared at the blank space on the wall behind Drew's head, where the old family photo used to hang before Patricia decided the lighting was unflattering. My thoughts drifted back to the cafe, to Aaliyah's arm, the sleeve that slipped just enough to reveal that ink, black falcon in flight, a string of numbers beneath it. Not a design from a Pinterest board or some trendy Instagram thing. It had weight, history, purpose. It wasn't just a tattoo. It was a story etched into skin. And Aaliyah's eyes, they carried the same stillness I used to associate with my late grandfather, a WWE medic who never bragged but always stood when the anthem played. That quiet strength, unshakable. I saw it again in her. I envied it. Suddenly Patricia's phone vibrated and slid closer to my plate. She stood, muttering something about needing her tea, and walked into the kitchen. She hadn't locked the screen. I didn't mean to look. But there it was, a group chat. Names I recognized, family, a few neighbors, and 2 women from her church circle. A message from earlier that day blinked on the screen. "She's always dramatic. Let her make a fool of herself." Another popped in from my cousin Carla. At least it wasn't on live TV this time. My stomach tightened. I scrolled, just a little. She doesn't know her place. Maybe this'll humble her. She's not like Drew, he makes us look good. I didn't feel the burn in my eyes until I realized I hadn't blinked. Patricia came back, tea in hand. She noticed the phone's position and snatched it without a word, tapping the screen blank. Drew raised an eyebrow. "What's wrong? You look like you saw a ghost." I didn't answer, just reached for my water. He chuckled, shaking his head. "You're not seriously offended, are you?" Come on, Malis, you always get so worked up over nothing. Yeah, my father added, still not looking up. They're just words. Let it go. Let it go. Again. I wiped my mouth with the napkin, stood, and walked out of the dining room. I didn't slam my chair, didn't raise my voice, just left. As I climbed the stairs, I heard Patricia call out, "Don't ruin Thanksgiving, too." I stopped at the top step. That line, so polished, so well-rehearsed, it stuck. I whispered it back under my breath. Thanksgiving. The same family that praised gratitude couldn't handle honesty. In my room, I sank into the edge of my bed. My fingers curled into the comforter like it could steady me. They wanted silence, obedience wrapped in politeness, a daughter who smiled, nodded, served the pie, and stayed out of the way. But silence had a cost, and I'd paid it for years. Not anymore. I stared at the wall, thinking of Alia's quiet strength, the mark on her arm, the sound of her breathing beside those soldiers. If I stayed quiet, they'd think they were right. I didn't sleep much that night. My thoughts circled the dinner table like restless ghosts. My mother's glare, Drew's smirk, the words on her phone screen still etched behind my eyes. At sunrise, I brewed coffee but didn't touch it. Instead, I stepped out onto the back deck, the cold wood beneath my slippers grounding me in a way nothing else could. My breath hung in the air, and the silence was finally mine. That's when I picked up the phone, and I called someone I hadn't spoken to in 14 years. Sergeant Mason. There was a beat. Then a laugh, low, warm, and familiar in a way that caught me off guard. Malis, I'll be damned. I thought you'd fallen off the planet. I almost did, I said softly. I just needed to hear a voice that never made me feel small. That quiet held for a moment, but it wasn't awkward. It was recognition. His voice cracked a little when he said, "You always had more in you than you believed. You still sound like you've got fire." I leaned against the railing, fingers curling around the wood. I saw someone yesterday, at the cafe. She reminded me of us, of the base. She had this falcon tattoo and this dignity, and it hit me harder than I expected. Mason went quiet, then said, "Was her name Aaliyah?" I blinked. Yes. His voice lowered. Malis. She wasn't just some woman. Aaliyah was one of ours. Intel. Quiet, sharp, one of the best listeners I've ever met. She retired years ago, never liked fanfare, but she noticed people, especially those who carried burdens in silence. She saw you. She remembered you. I pressed a hand over my chest. She said something that felt like she knew exactly who I was, even though I couldn't recognize myself anymore. She did, and she told me that if you ever called, she'd want me to remind you. You mattered back then. And you still do. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the dry leaves near the porch steps. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. I let it settle into me, like an anchor. I walked away, I whispered. I let my family convince me that staying on the base made me foolish. My mom called it wasting time with uniforms and wounded egos. So I left. Mason exhaled. And yet you still called me. I chuckled, bitter and breathy. Yeah, I guess I needed someone to remind me I wasn't crazy back then. There was a pause before he said, "You weren't crazy, you were brave, and quiet doesn't mean invisible." I closed my eyes. Suddenly I was back there again. The smell of jet fuel, sand sticking to my boots, long days in logistics surrounded by noise and tension, but also laughter, loyalty. The day I hesitated on a scheduling call and Mason had pulled me aside later, put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You keep making yourself small, Malis. Stop. We need you loud." I never forgot that, but I'd buried it. When the call ended, I stayed on the deck. The air stung a little now. I stepped back inside and moved through the kitchen like I was walking through someone else's house. Everything looked the same, but it felt off. Then my eyes caught the folded napkin by the sink. It was nothing, really. Just a soft white square my niece had played with during Thanksgiving a few years back. She had folded it into a perfect triangle, like the ones handed to grieving families. She didn't know the meaning, but her small fingers had made something reverent. Patricia had rolled her eyes and told her to stop playing with sad things. I picked it up now, smoothed the creases. It was a little wrinkled from time, but I folded it again, tight and neat. It fit perfectly in the pocket of my flannel shirt, and I left it there. I stood at the sink and looked out into the yard. The morning sun had risen higher now, warming the tops of the trees. I felt something I hadn't felt in years, not rage, not sadness, but clarity and resolve. It was time they remembered who I really am. That afternoon, I put on the old boots from my deployment years and drove straight to the VFW. The drive wasn't long, but I took it slow. I passed familiar streets where the leaves had started to curl gold and rust along the edges. Kids on bikes zipped through puddles near the sidewalk. At a red light, I caught my own reflection in the rearview mirror, older, sharper, but somehow clearer than I remembered. I turned into the small lot behind the VFW hall and parked beneath the crooked flagpole that hadn't flown a flag since the last Memorial Day. I stepped inside, and the quiet met me like a handshake. Not silence, exactly, but the still kind of quiet that only exists in places where people have cried without shame. The hall was mostly empty. Just a few folding chairs stacked near the wall, the faint smell of wood polish and sunlight filtering through the dusty windows. But what drew me was the far end of the room. A single wall, painted navy, lined with framed portraits and etched brass plates. The wall of names. I walked slowly, recognizing some faces instantly. Old neighbors, husbands of women I'd known, sons who didn't make it home. My eyes paused on a name I didn't expect. It was small, easy to miss. Aaliyah Torres. The photo was soft focus, black and white. Her head slightly turned like she wasn't used to posing. Beneath the frame, someone had tucked 3 paper cranes, folded delicately from torn pages of what looked like a Bible or maybe a hymn book. I didn't hear Commander Reyes approach until I caught the scent of pipe tobacco. "She didn't want a funeral," he said quietly. I turned to him. "She deserved one." He gave a slow nod. "A few of the guys insisted we add her here. Took a while to get approval. She was quiet, but she was one of us." "She always saw more than she said," I murmured. He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small black device, like an old-school voice recorder. "We found this in her jacket, only one file saved, and she said if someone came asking to give it to you." I stared at it. "She said my name?" He gave me a long look. "She did. Twice." My hands felt strangely numb as I took it from him. I stepped back toward a bench near the wall and sat. It felt too sacred to rush, too heavy to put off. I clicked the tiny play button. There was a bit of static at first. Then her voice, lower than I remembered, soft like she was speaking just over my shoulder. "Melis, if you're hearing this, I'm gone, and I want you to know, thank you. You didn't just help me that day. You remembered me when no one else did. You sat beside me like I wasn't broken, like I still had a story to tell." I held the recorder with both hands, trying not to breathe too loudly. "I know what they did to you. I saw it. The way they made you feel like you had to shrink yourself to be acceptable. That kind of shame? It's a weapon. And they'll use it until you start believing them. But I didn't. And I hope you won't." My throat tightened. "You are the witness. You saw what people forgot. You carry truth. So don't let them erase you. Don't let them erase us. We were here. We mattered." The message ended with silence. Not a click. Not even a breath. Just the space where she used to be. I lowered the recorder and stared at the floor. My hands had started trembling without me realizing. I hadn't cried since Dad passed, not even when Drew slammed the door and left for good. But this? This cracked something open in me. She had known my name, when my own mother barely used it unless she wanted something. I looked up again at her photo, the cranes, folded with care. The triangle shape echoed something I'd felt earlier that morning. the old napkin tucked in my pocket now pressed flat against my chest. I blinked through tears and suddenly a memory flooded back. One Christmas, maybe 10 years ago, we were at Patricia's house. She was hosting one of those picture-perfect dinner parties, charcuterie boards, jazz on low volume, everyone pretending to be something shinier than they were. I'd brought flyers from the local veterans shelter, thinking maybe someone might want to help. When I started to speak, Patricia cut in. "Let's not bore the room with sad politics," she said, smiling so wide it hurt. "We're trying to keep things light, honey." And just like that, I shut up. Aaliyah had seen it. The shutting down, the tucking away of myself to keep the peace. But not anymore. I stood slowly and turned to Reyes. "Do you know if the local press still runs community service pieces?" He raised an eyebrow. "They do. Especially if there's a face and a story." I looked again at Aaliyah's photo. "Then I've got both, and something else they might want to hear." He nodded, then gave me a knowing smile. "You always had more fire than you let on." "I'm done hiding the match," I said. I stared at the wall once more and leaned in close to her photo. "You won't be erased, Aaliyah. Neither will I." By the time the sun broke over the tree line, I was already dressed. I hadn't really slept, just drifted in and out with Aaliyah's voice replaying in my head. There was a kind of clarity in the exhaustion, though. No more second-guessing, no more waiting for someone else to speak first. I clicked send on the last email and stared at the screen for a beat. The file was out. Her voice was out. I couldn't take it back now, and I didn't want to. By mid-morning, I was standing behind a makeshift podium inside the community center down by Mulberry and 12th. The folding chairs weren't even half full, maybe 12 people tops. Most were veterans or press interns. Commander Reyes stood quietly behind me, his arms folded, face unreadable. I held Aaliyah's dog tags in my palm, rubbing the smooth metal like a prayer coin. The microphone squealed slightly as I leaned in. I didn't have a prepared speech. I had her memory, and my own, so I started talking. "I spilled coffee on a young woman at a gas station 2 weeks ago," I began. "That's how all this started. Not heroics, not sacrifice, just a clumsy moment between two strangers. A few heads tilted, curious, but I didn't look away. Not when I saw her hands shaking, not when I saw her boots, the same standard-issue combat soles I wore through Kandahar. My voice was steady at first, but when I got to the part about the crowd watching Aaliyah crumble, people pulling out phones, whispering, walking past her like she was an inconvenience, I felt it crack. The reason I stayed wasn't pity, it was recognition. She reminded me of what it feels like to be invisible after you've given everything. She reminded me of me. Someone coughed softly near the back. Cameras rolled and I kept going. For the first time in a decade, I let my guard down and simply told the truth. About how Aaliyah's mother refused to claim her body. About the charity quietly denying funeral help when they found out she was LGBTQ. About the silence from the very institutions that once saluted her. Then it happened. The live stream screen on my right blinked once, then again. A sudden flood of messages started crawling up the display. Fake vet. Staged drama. She's doing this for attention. I froze. The comments came faster, uglier. One message was highlighted in red. "That girl was a junkie. Stop lionizing trash." I looked over at the tech assistant who was frantically typing at the laptop. "Someone hacked the feed," he muttered. "I'm trying to block them, but they're bouncing IPs." On the main screen, a new image flashed, Patricia's headshot. Then another comment with my father's campaign email. My chest tightened. This wasn't random. Someone wanted to discredit Aaliyah's story. And mine. I turned toward Reyes. "Are you seeing this?" I asked quietly. He nodded, jaw tight. I saw. One of the reporters, a young woman with dark curls and big hoop earrings, stood. "Ma'am, do you have any comment about these allegations?" I opened my mouth to respond, but all I managed was, "You think I made this up?" It sounded weak, defensive. And I hated that. People started shuffling out. A few lingered. One man offered a sympathetic shrug. But the mood had shifted. The trust, the space to mourn honestly, it vanished in seconds. I didn't even remember leaving the building. One moment I was behind the podium, the next I was sitting in my car, door half open, hands gripping the steering wheel like it could keep me from falling apart. I reached for my phone, hovered over the email folder. A part of me wanted to pull everything back, delete the recording, pretend this never happened. Was I really that naive? I whispered to myself. To think truth was enough? The passenger seat held my old deployment boots, still dusted from the VFW floor yesterday. I stared at them. Aaliyah had smiled when she saw them. Real groundwalker boots, she'd said, like they meant something. Maybe they still did. Maybe standing your ground doesn't always look like applause or headlines. Maybe sometimes it looks like shaking hands on a steering wheel and a vow made in silence. I picked up the dog tags, looped them around my fingers, and whispered to the empty car, I was silent for years. I won't be again, not even if it destroys the family name. The envelope was pale gray, no return address, just my name scrawled in stiff cursive, like it was trying to be formal but still carry a slap. I bent down, picked it up off the welcome mat, and held it under the hallway light. The seal wasn't broken. I hesitated for a second, then slid a butter knife under the flap. Inside was a thick letterhead stamped with a law firm I recognized from childhood Christmas parties, the kind of firm that specialized in estate loopholes and protecting rich people from their own messes. And at the bottom, my mother's signature. Not a call, not a knock, not even a text. Just legal silence, mailed like a threat. The document accused me of intentional defamation, willful misrepresentation, and damaging the public image and strategic alliances of the family. My pulse picked up. Another line. By publicly aligning with unverifiable individuals, you have violated the principles of familial trust. Familial trust. I nearly laughed. My hands were trembling, but not from fear, from the burn of betrayal. She hadn't even bothered to say it herself. She had a team do it for her. I set the letter down on the kitchen table, then just stood there, staring at the wood grain, thinking about how many dinners we'd eaten around that same surface. Roast chicken, Thanksgiving stuffing, every holiday forced into politeness because appearances mattered. Always appearances. I whispered, she wants me erased. Again. I barely slept. By the time the sky lightened, I had emailed the free legal clinic near Broadview. A volunteer attorney named Jasmine called me back within the hour and offered to meet that afternoon. The room they placed me in was modest. Folding chairs, old fans spinning above, walls that smelled faintly of coffee and toner. Jasmine looked young enough to be one of my former students. She sat across from me, legal pad in hand, face kind but sharp. I passed her the cease and desist, and she read it over silently, flipping a page, then another. This isn't just about family, she said at last. This is boilerplate political suppression. I blinked. Come again? She turned the document toward me and pointed. This firm, Thaler and Quinn, they're known in legal circles for doing quiet cleanups for certain political donors. We've seen this exact structure before. Same phrasing, same tactics. When someone starts getting traction that could embarrass a client, they shut it down before it gets legs. I leaned back. You're saying this isn't just my mom? It's bigger? Jasmine nodded. The firm is tied to donors who've supported your father's re-election bids. This is coordinated. I felt like the air was knocked out of me. The speech, the hacked live stream, the bot accounts, Patricia's photo on the stream, my father's campaign email in the comments. It wasn't isolated, it was a pattern, a machine. I didn't realize I'd started crying until I saw Jasmine hand me a tissue. She watched me get pushed around growing up, I said hoarsely, and now she's the one doing the pushing. It wasn't the letter that hurt most. It was knowing she never hesitated. There wasn't a pause, a moment of, maybe this is too far, just a cold pen stroke and a legal courier. I sat there in silence for a few beats, then pulled out my phone. Do you mind? I asked Jasmine. Not at all. I stepped out into the hallway and hit Reyes's name. He picked up after the second ring. You okay? He asked. No pleasantries. No, but I'm clear. I explained everything, slowly, carefully. The letter, the law firm, the funding link. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, I expected strategy, a plan. What came instead was a long pause and then his voice, quieter than I'd ever heard it. Sometimes silence isn't peace, Melis, he said. It's permission. I stood there a while, eyes on a fading poster about rent assistance peeling off the wall. And it hit me. This wasn't a family argument anymore. It wasn't about reputations or Facebook comments. It was about what happens when people in power would rather bury a soldier's truth than admit their system failed her. When I got back to the room, Jasmine was packing up my file. We'll support you, she said, but just know, they'll push harder now. I nodded. Then so will I. Back home, I dropped my purse on the counter and started to change out of the buttoned-up shirt I wore for the clinic. My hand brushed something inside the purse. Paper. I reached in and pulled out a crumpled napkin. Aaliyah's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. You stood. I saw you. I held it in both hands. That line had felt simple when she first gave it to me. Now, it felt like a battle cry. I walked to the kitchen table, picked up the cease and desist, and folded it neatly in half. Then I grabbed a red Sharpie from the drawer, the one I used for grading student essays. Across the bottom I wrote, "You don't get to silence me." I hadn't stepped into that auditorium in over 2 decades, and yet the smell of old varnish and floor wax hit me like I'd never left. The bleachers creaked beneath polished shoes, folding chairs lined the gym floor, and on the projection screen hung the seal of the Veterans Education Assembly. There was a time when I was invisible here, voted most forgettable senior year. I still remembered the yearbook quote beside my photo, quiet, polite, nothing special. This time I wasn't seated in the back. I walked straight to the stage, my heels clicking loud against the waxed floor. The school counselor glanced up from the program sheet. "Oh, Melis, you're here. You'll introduce our honored guest before we begin." She didn't ask. She assumed, just like old times. The seat marked Guest of Honor had a name placard I hadn't expected. Board member, Mrs. Ruth Elgin. My mother. I didn't sit. I walked to the podium with one item in my hand. A photo, no frame, just creased edges. I turned to face the crowd. Alumni, students, press, even some of the same teachers who once waved me away with bored eyes. I adjusted the mic. This morning, I was asked to introduce our honored guest, I began, voice steady. But I'd rather show you something first. I held the photo up, turning it slowly so the front rows could see. Gasps rippled. It was Aaliyah, collapsed on the floor of that cafe weeks ago, surrounded by people who looked away, who kept sipping coffee and scrolling their phones while her body curled in on itself. No one helping, no one moving. "This woman," I said quietly, "is the reason I'm here." A hush took the room. Even the clink of a dropped pen echoed. I scanned the crowd slowly, giving no one the comfort of looking away. You all remember the scholarship fundraiser held for veterans a few years back. Big speeches, big checks, lots of photos on the website. I looked at the row of school board members, my mother, stiff and composed in her maroon blazer, eyes flicking to the side. But what you didn't see, I said, was a young woman. This woman, who crawled across that cafe floor while every eye in the room stayed glued to their screens. No one helped her. Not one person stood. I paused, let the silence stretch. Except one voice, a whisper really. She said, "You stood. I saw you." I lowered the photo. That's what she said to me after I paid her bill and walked her out. She remembered the moment I stood. Not when cameras flashed, not when the press came, but when no one else moved. I let that hang. My eyes drifted to the corner of the gym where the AV table sat. The tech student gave me a subtle thumbs up. I nodded. The projector flickered, and a grainy cell phone video began to play. A crowd murmured as the screen showed our high school parking lot, gray asphalt, windy. Then, a military chopper descended. Students scrambled to film it. In the video, 2 officers stepped out, and a woman in uniform, Aaliyah, walked forward and saluted. She turned and embraced someone. That someone was me. No press, no stage, just a moment caught by chance, 10 minutes after I'd been told I didn't belong at the family table. "They didn't come for my family," I said calmly. "They came for her." Heads turned, whispers grew louder. My mother still hadn't moved. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't glare, but I walked to the edge of the stage, right up to the front row, and asked, "Still think I should have stayed quiet?" One of the students near the front, Freckles, maybe 16, blurted, "Is that video real?" I stepped aside. "You can ask her yourself." The doors at the back of the auditorium opened. Aaliyah entered slowly, cane in hand, uniform crisp, jaw set. Her walk wasn't fast, but every step felt like thunder. I met her halfway down the aisle, reached into my purse. The napkin, the same one I'd kept tucked away. I handed it to her. She unfolded it and read aloud. "Sometimes standing up means getting shoved first, but it also means someone finally stands with you." A hush blanketed the room again, this time softer. Then she looked around, at students, teachers, news crews, and board members. "This woman," she said, eyes locking with mine, "saved my life, long before a helicopter ever touched down." No applause came, no need. The weight of it settled without fanfare. My mother tried to speak, but the mic had been turned off. For once, she sat back down without a word. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The silence she left behind was louder than anything she could have said. After the crowd started to shuffle out, I stood still on that stage for just a moment longer. No applause, no music, just the shuffle of shoes, the low murmur of awkward conversation, and the weight of everything unsaid. A few people patted me on the back in passing, muttering, "Thank you," like they didn't know what else to say. Others avoided eye contact entirely. One former teacher gave me a weak smile and then glanced away, ashamed maybe. I didn't expect a parade. I didn't need one. By the time I stepped down from the stage, the auditorium was mostly empty. The media had packed up. The rows of folding chairs were being stacked against the wall. And there, abandoned in the seat labeled "Board Chair M.J. Ayers," was a plain envelope. No name, no seal, just an old-fashioned fold and a familiar sharp crease down the center. I knew that handwriting. I didn't even open it, not then. I slipped it into the inside pocket of my coat like it weighed nothing at all, and everything at once. Outside, the sky had faded into that soft lavender dusk that always seems to arrive too quickly in November. Aaliyah met me near the flagpole. She didn't say much, just gave me a long look and nodded. We drove in silence most of the way to the community banquet that evening. Neither of us had much to prove anymore. What needed to be said had already echoed louder than either of us had planned. The banquet hall wasn't grand, just warm. String lights ran along the wood beams overhead, and the scent of roasted vegetables and buttered rolls lingered in the air. It wasn't a political event or a fundraiser. It was just a shared table, a space for veterans to gather, share stories, and, for a night, feel less alone. I hadn't realized how much I needed that until I saw the table they'd set for us. Not up front, not in the back, just near the middle, with mismatched chairs and cloth napkins someone had taken the time to iron. We were already seated when a young woman rolled up to the table in a sleek wheelchair that looked military-issued. Her name tag read, "Skylar." Her hands were strong, her eyes sharper than her age suggested. Probably early 20s, but her posture said she'd seen enough to outgrow it. Aaliyah leaned over, folded her napkin with the kind of practiced grace that only comes from habit, and started creasing it into a shape. I watched quietly as it transformed into a tiny bird, delicate but with wings that looked ready to fly. She handed it to Skylar. "You'll need this," she said gently, "for when the world tries to shove you too." Skylar blinked. "That often, huh?" "More than you think," Aaliyah replied. "But sometimes someone notices. And sometimes you push back." Skylar smiled and tucked the napkin bird into the pocket on her lap blanket, like it was a secret she planned to keep. As dinner was served, a few quiet conversations circled the table. One older man across from us shared a story about losing his hearing in Iraq. A woman next to him joked about falling asleep during a drone briefing. It felt honest. No boasting, no self-pity, just life, scarred but standing. Then Aliyah turned to me. Her voice softened, but there was steel underneath it. "You didn't just help me off that floor," she said. "You helped me feel like I wasn't crazy for believing I mattered." I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but she held up a hand. "Let me finish," she added with a half smile. "I'm starting a nonprofit for women vets with PTSD, safe housing, trauma care, job help, no red tape, no pity." I stared at her, unsure if I was hearing right. "And," she continued, "I want you to be on the board. You get what it means to be invisible, but more importantly, you know how to be seen." That caught me off guard more than any insult or ambush ever had. "I'm not sure I'm qualified for that," I said, half laughing. "You're not," she said, dead serious. "None of us are. That's why we're perfect." The table went quiet again, not awkward, just thoughtful, a space where something new had taken root. I looked over at Skylar. Her eyes were locked on me as if waiting for permission. "You don't owe anyone your silence," I told her. "Not me, not this place, not anyone." She didn't say anything, just nodded, and I saw a tiny crack in the armor. Not weakness, just room for something else to grow. Later, as plates were cleared and mugs of lukewarm coffee were passed around, someone noticed the extra chair at our table. A plain wooden one, no name tag, no cushion. "Should we save it for someone?" Skylar asked. I glanced at it, then back at her. "No," I said. "It's for whoever needs it next. Someone always will." The room buzzed with quiet stories, old laughter, and new beginnings, but in that moment everything felt still. "And next time," I whispered, "they won't get shoved alone."